Hi there, and welcome to the Surviving and Thriving in Residency podcast. I'm Charley Lowry, your host and director of GME Relations at PracticeLink. This show is all about exploring the world of graduate and undergraduate medical education. We'll dive into the real-life experiences, successes, and challenges faced by medical students, residents, and fellows, while also highlighting valuable tools to support you, whether that's financial planning, student aid, or the many free resources provided by PracticeLink. If you're thinking about med school, currently studying, or deep into residency or fellowship, this podcast is here to offer insights and support to make your journey a bit easier than those before you. Today's guest is Dr. Jeanne Krick, who serves as a lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Army and serves as the program director for neonatology fellowship at San Antonio Military Medical Center in Texas, as well as consultant to the Surgeon General for medical ethics. So I want to welcome you to our podcast and thank you so much for joining us today.
You got it. Thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited.
Yeah. So I really just want to talk a lot today, of course, about your military service, how that plays into medical school, things like that. But to kick it off, let's just talk a little bit about your decision to join the military and when that happened.
Yeah. So I don't exactly come from a huge military family. My dad didn't serve or anything like that, but I did have a cousin and an uncle, a grandfather who had served. And actually, as I was growing up, one of my close cousins went to West Point and we followed along on his journey, went to his graduation. So I was familiar that this thing called West Point was out there. And then I decided probably when I was about 12 years old that I wanted to be a doctor, and very specifically decided I wanted to be a pediatrician for a number of different reasons. It relates back to growing up, how close my mother was with our pediatrician. So giving a little bit more backstory, I actually had an older sister who passed away before I was born at about 15 months from what we think now is a very rare mitochondrial disorder. So she spent her last 6 months of her life in and out of the hospital, in the PICU, on the ward. And my mom formed a really close relationship with the pediatrician. And that's the pediatrician that we ended up going to growing up, myself and the rest of my siblings. And seeing that relationship and how impactful it was on my mother just really formed my identity and who I wanted to be growing up. So I decided somewhere, I think I was about 5th or 6th grade, that's what I wanted to do. So I was going through life, and then in high school, 9/11 happened. And there was something about the aftermath of that made me really want to do more than just become a doctor. And I really felt this call to serve. And in that process, I found out that there was a way to become a doctor in the Army specifically. That's what I was interested in. And not only that, but they had Army pediatricians. So I can give back, and they're going to pay for my medical school and maybe my undergraduate, and I can still be a pediatrician. Well, okay, that checks all those boxes. So that's what got me towards thinking about going into the military. And I ended up going to West Point, the United States Military Academy, and then medical school from there, and have been in the Army since I was 18 years old. So more than half of my life at this point.
Wow. Okay. So since you were 18, so undergraduate was completely paid for by the military.
Yes, it was. And like I said, I went to West Point, and while you're there, you're not only a student, but you're a soldier. You raise your hand and swear an oath the very first day that you get there. You swear many other oaths as you go along, and they pay for your schooling, but you're doing military duties throughout that whole time. So there's a whole other structure and a lot more responsibilities than there would be at a normal college. Like, I lived in barracks instead of a dorm room. I had a rank while I was there. I was a private, a corporal, a sergeant, a lieutenant. And so it was a very different college experience.
Sure. Wow. Okay. So the decision to go to medical school was already made. It sounds like at a very young age, right? So tell me about the whole application process for medical school.
Yeah. So my process was a little bit different coming out of the military academy. So the hardest part for me was having the military let me apply. at the United States Military Academy and the other military academies within the United States, so the Naval Academy, the Air Force Academy, they have certain quotas that have to fill different needs of the military. So only 2% of the graduating class is even allowed to apply and go to medical school. So it's a very small number of us. So you have to go through this whole big yeah, it
2%?
2%.
Whew.
It ends up
Okay.
being somewhere between 20 to 30 people each year.
Wow.
That process was a lot. You had to go through this whole board. That board, the interview for that was much more intimidating than any of my medical school interviews.
Sure. Yeah.
So once you were allowed to apply, then I started applying to medical schools in kind of the normal fashion, sending out my applications, getting interviews, all of that.
Okay. And at that point, you were committed to the military. You didn't really think about civilian medical school at that point, right?
So I did actually consider civilian. So I had a couple of different options. So I could either go to the military's medical school, which is ultimately what I ended up doing. But the much more frequent choice was that people would go to a civilian medical school and use something called the Health Professional Scholarship Program. So it's a really unique program through actually all three branches of the military, but Army for me, where the Army will pay for your medical school and will pay you while you're going to medical school in exchange for 4 years at the end of your training. Okay. So I was simultaneously applying for the military's medical school along with, UC Irvine and a bunch of other ones that I had out there and getting interviews in different spots. Ultimately, I ended up going to the military's medical school because I liked it the best.
Sure. And that's USHU's in Bethesda, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Nice. And how about medical school? What kind of challenges did you face? Do you remember some of the biggest hurdles you had in medical school?
Biochemistry.
Just that word makes me shiver a little bit. Yeah.
Right. Like it brings back some PTSD, right? It was really interesting coming from West Point, going to the military's medical school. West Point to me was very military with school added on. Don't get me wrong. It's college, but medical school was much more medical school than military. Yeah, we wore a uniform. Yeah, all of our rotations were in military centers, but it was medical school. So similar challenges to everybody else, balancing studying for my step exams and figuring out truly what my study style was. I don't think I really knew it. I don't know about you or any of the other listeners. I think medical school is where you really figure out how you learn. And it took a good 6 months for me to figure out that my butt needed to be in the seat at class for me to actually retain something.
Yeah. Most guests that have been on the podcast who have talked about their medical school years have mentioned having to learn how to study all over. Like they never learned in high school or undergraduate really the study patterns that a medical student faces. So yeah, everybody talks about how they have to learn how to study.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
How was the school set up? So first 2 years are classroom and last 2 years are clinical. Is it like that in the military?
Yes. While I was there, it was the very traditional first 2 years, second to the last 2 years. It's a little different now where it's now the first year and a half are spent doing modules as they go through the different body systems. And the last 2.5 years are spent doing more your clinical time. Definitely changed since I went through, as many medical schools sure have in the last 15 years. But it looks very similar to a normal, regular medical school. It's just that your clinical rotations, instead of being at the local hospital, are all over the country. So my 3rd and 4th year of medical school, I called myself a road warrior. And I moved every 6 weeks. The military put me up in lodging. But I spent, 6 weeks in Washington State doing pediatrics, 6 weeks in Hawaii doing psychiatry. That was wonderful. Yeah. And then the summers looked very different. We didn't really get summers off. We were doing something military related during that time.
Okay. And so residency was pediatrics.
Yes, I went pediatrics at Joint Base Lewis McChord, which is in Washington State, in Tacoma, so just south of Seattle, at Madigan Army Medical Center.
Okay. So tell me a little bit about that, if you will. How was the transition from medical student to resident?
Yeah, there were some things that I think were expected, and I knew I knew I was going to work hard. I knew that I was going into a military setting. I knew the population that I would serve. I think the transition for me, what was shocking for me was what I enjoyed and what I didn't. So, as a medical student, I really saw myself as loving that general pediatrics mission of being in clinic every day, seeing well children, talking to parents. I really thought that's what I was going to love. Transitioning to residency, it really surprised me how it wasn't that at all. I loved inpatient medicine. I loved being on the wards. I loved being in the NICU, obviously how I ended up where I am. And I think part of it was the administrative burdens that you see more as a resident than you saw as a medical student. So what real impact does having notes have on your life? What about support for clinic staff and things like that can impact your day-to-day? That really did shape my experience in residency and how I ended up where I am today.
Gotcha. What about the match? What do you have to say about the military match?
Yeah, the military match is different than the civilian in that it happens earlier. So it happens in December, so the same time that the civilian fellowship match happens, usually the same day, actually. And it's a little bit, in some ways, more predictable, in some ways less predictable. More predictable in that it's a much smaller group and smaller cohort. And you can kind of, depending on your specialty, kind of know where you're going to go. So in my year, I knew that there were less applicants for pediatrics than there were spots. So check, I was probably going to match pediatrics.
That's a good feeling, right? Yeah.
But not only that, I also knew that the place that I wanted to go, Washington, there were only a couple of us who had ranked it first, and I knew they liked me. So I kind of knew what the results were going to be. I mean, you still have heart palpitations going into it, but
Right.
yeah.
Now, where are you from originally?
I'm from Southern California, so Anaheim.
Okay, so Washington, not too far away. At least it's on the same coast.
Yeah.
Right.
By that point, I'd lived on the East Coast for 8 years, so it was trekking back and forth.
At PracticeLink, we believe tomorrow's healthcare leaders deserve support today. That's why we created the First Practice Fund, a scholarship program awarding $2,500 to 6 dedicated individuals preparing for their first practice. The next application window opens soon. Don't miss your opportunity. Your future is waiting. Find out more at PracticeLink.com.
So tell me, at this point, you're a resident, pediatric resident. What were the biggest benefits of being in the military when you were in residency? Other than what you just said, where you have less residents applying or less applicants applying for the residency spot.
Yeah, so being in the military as a resident, I think the biggest thing for me was my interaction with the patients, in that there was an extra connection there. So I should say that at the time, my husband, we're still married, he was on active duty as well, but not medical. So he was an armor officer. So he was on the other side of base, commanding troops, going and doing military missions. And a lot of the parents that I was seeing, they were parts of units that were doing kind of the same thing. So there was this automatic connection that I had with my patient population that, hey, tell me about, oh, is dad gone at Yakima Training Center for another couple months? Let's talk about the challenges of that for your kiddo. I loved that. Other things that I really appreciated about being military was that I didn't really have to worry that much about insurance coverage for things. I could really serve my patients and focus what they needed medically, and not so much, well, what insurance do you have? Does it approve this? Does it approve that? A lot of other intangibles. There are some frustrations, the fact that I have to take a physical fitness test every 6 months. I got to wear a uniform. Sometimes there's random military things that pop up, but you're a bit protected while you're in that training mode.
Nice. Yep. I think sometimes wearing a uniform takes the hassle out of having to worry about what you're going to wear anyway, right? So It's
I'm a neonatologist. I wear scrubs. So
right, right. So tell me about that. So you decided to pursue a fellowship.
Mhm.
So tell me about that and how that works. So your fellowship is a civilian fellowship. It's not actually through the military.
Well, the fellowship I attended was civilian. The fellowship that I run now is military. So
Okay.
it's a little strange in that typically military applicants to neonatology do train in the military system. I was a very different situation. I told you my husband was active duty military at the time. Well, he was about to take command there in Washington state, and there's no military NICU fellowship in Washington. So the Army said, hey, we know she's in forever. So let's try to do her a solid because they're a dual active duty couple, and let's try to keep them together. So they let me train civilians so that I could stay with my husband. So I was granted the opportunity to train at the University of Washington.
Wow.
I got lucky there.
And how was the application process? Was that really difficult? I'm sure it was stressful.
Very. And this one was very much less known what the outcome was going to be. So in addition to just the normal, am I a good enough candidate, getting all my stuff together like you would for the ERAS on the civilian side, on the military side, we only have so many spots per year that we can send to fellowship because we need general pediatricians. So they know that if they take me and train me, they're losing really a general pediatrician. So in addition to that, it's kind of up to them. And by them, I now mean me because I'm part of the group that makes that decision where they're going to send me. So that was very much biting my nails and waiting until midnight when the results came out of where am I going to train? Am I going to train? Are they going to let me do this? And is there a spot this year or not? And now sitting on the other side and being in the room and seeing how the sausage is made, it's very eye-opening.
Gotcha. Now, you also did a fellowship in clinical bioethics, right? So these were simultaneous fellowships, or yes, okay. Well, tell me about that. Tell me about the clinical bioethics. I mean, that has to be a not so common fellowship choice.
It is not common. So while I was in neonatology fellowship in my first year, part of most pediatric fellowships, you have to have a big research part of your fellowship. So most pediatric fellowships are 3 years long. Really, a third to half of that is clinical. The other 2/3 or half are spent doing some sort of scholarly pursuit. So in my first year of NICU fellowship, it was really trying to figure out what is my scholarly work product going to be? What is that going to be in? And I talked to a lot of different people, and it really takes me back to what I was talking about with what brought me to medicine in the first place. And it was that connection between my mom, so a parent, and the doctor. So I went back to like, all right, what is that relationship? How do we foster it? What does that look like? That led me down a path of, all right, I want to study this whole how do parents experience the ICU environment and how are we impacting that as physicians? And very long story short, led me to discovering this whole world of bioethics, which kind of knew what it was before, kind of slept through half of those classes. Kidding. But led me into that and ended up doing that concurrent fellowship during my second and third year of neonatology. It was busy. So if I wasn't on service for neonatology, I was on call for bioethics. And part of the fellowship was doing a master's in bioethics. And this was pre-Zoom days. So all of our classes were in person. It was a lot. It was a busy second and third year, but man, I don't regret it for a second. It completely changed how I think. I always tell people that all of my training up to that point taught me what to think. You know, you're studying biochemistry, you're studying what and trying to memorize things. Bioethics was really all about how to think. And it just opened my mind to a lot of different things and really opened up career potentials for me long term.
I know you don't have a number, but how many people do you think pursue a fellowship in bioethics and clinical bioethics? How many were in your program?
Yeah, so our program was the only pediatric clinical bioethics program out there in Seattle. And there were 3 of us in my year. So there were 2 of us who were doing a different fellowship at the same time. So myself and a PICU fellow. And then a third one who was more of the full-time fellow. She was a lawyer. Across the country, there are not many. I mean, I couldn't tell you the exact number, but I want to say it's 10 to 15 that actually have fellowships. There are more and more degree programs popping up in bioethics, and even more programs where you can get a certificate in bioethics. Those are popping up like hotcakes. It is a massively growing field right now. Just within the last 10 years, they've developed a certification process for being a healthcare ethics consultant. It's amazing to see how the field has evolved, and I think in a really, really good way to help patients and hospital systems get at some of those base bioethical principles.
That's so good to hear. I think it's much needed. And yeah, so I figured, so this was 2018 for you in the fellowship. So I figured maybe it had grown quite a bit since then till now. Yeah, which makes sense. So can you talk a little bit about being a consultant to the Army Surgeon General? What is that like, and what's your role there? What is consulting?
Yeah.
What does that involve?
Yeah, it's a very unique role. So under the Surgeon General of the Army, there are a lot of different consultants. So there is a consultant for each career field and career specialty. And typically the consultant role is figuring out where to put everybody. So I have a consultant as a pediatric subspecialist who he doesn't decide, but he helps figure out how do we distribute people to accomplish all of our needs at all these different spots. So he helps with career management and projecting who's going to move where. That's a huge part of the consultant role. As bioethics, I don't have that. I don't have people. The other piece of the consultant program that is huge and where I come in is in policy. So when policies come down that have pieces of, like I said, something that relates to pediatric subspecialists, that goes to my consultant. He looks through it and puts in his advice. You can imagine there's a whole lot of policies that bioethics touches. So for example, in the Army, they are thinking about how to deal with things on future battlefields and future wars. One of the things they're looking at is how are we going to triage patients if we get overrun with casualties? So I was one of the consultants who had a big hand in reviewing that and saying, like, this applies, if you look at this from an ethics lens, this is how you can do this. This is how you shouldn't do this, and giving some practical advice. And then as different things bubble up to the surface, they may reach out to me and say, hey, we'd like your eyes on this. I've also just made myself available as a resource to other people across the Army because there's only about 5 or 10 of us who have any sort of bioethics training. So you can imagine there's people at these hospitals who are saying, I just got put in charge of an ethics committee and I don't know what this means. Can you help me? So I have been used to help other places do that as well.
Wow. It looks great. When I read that, I thought, oh, wow, that is interesting right there. I have never seen that on anyone's CV before.
Yeah, it's different.
Hi there, my name is Margaret Giggy, recipient of the First Practice Fund Scholarship. We all know starting a career in medicine isn't easy. For many of us, financial stress is just another part of the journey. That's why the First Practice Fund meant so much to me. It's not just a scholarship, it's true support for those working to bring care where it's needed most. Applications for the next round of this no-strings, free-to-enter scholarship are opening soon. Visit PracticeLink.com for more information.
Tell me about being a program director for the fellowship program at Brooke Army. How is that? And I know you love it. I know that you're incredible with the program there. So tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah. So being a program director, I would say, is the most rewarding and most challenging job that I've ever had. It took about a year drinking from a fire hose, trying to figure out what was going on and learning the cycle of the year to feel like I could really make the program my own and mold it with my trainees. I really love being able to mentor, coach, train my fellows, respond to their needs and be flexible. We took our program was already in a pretty good spot, but I think that we clarified some of our guiding principles. So one of the things that I pride myself on is being very family friendly and very fellow responsive. So what does that mean? I got to train my fellows. I got to make sure that they have adequate training, but if their kid is sick, how can I adapt their schedule or their needs or the call schedule to make sure that we're responding to that? Because if I don't have a fellow who's in a good place at home, how are they going to learn? It's just not practical. So I think that anytime I have a big issue that comes up, my first question is, am I sticking to those guiding principles that I have for myself of being flexible for my fellows and responsive to them and being family friendly, knowing that that is supporting my trainees and becoming the best neonatologist they can possibly be.
That's so nice. And do you try to incorporate clinical bioethics in everything?
I can't help it.
That's good.
I think that it comes out a lot when we have our case discussions. Neonatology is fraught with bioethical conundrums. So they will often hear me get up on my soapbox and talk about a case, factor in my 2 cents. They'd get that whether I was program director or not. I can't help myself. So it definitely comes out.
But you also work with perinatology. We haven't even mentioned that, but how busy are you in an average day?
So I think one of the things I love about my job is that my schedule's all over the place. I don't have an average day. Every day is different. So I have weeks where I'm on service where, I'm kind of go most of the day, either dealing with the clinical unit, deliveries, prenatal counseling sessions, or teaching for my residents and fellows, to maybe I was on call overnight, and so I'm post-call the next day and trying to catch up on emails, pretty active in research, so trying to push forward some research projects, trying to do the admin stuff that I've got for the consultant. And oh, by the way, I'm the chair of our ethics committee too, so every single ethics consult that comes through our hospital, I end up staffing. So every single day looks different, and I love that, in that I don't think I'm ever bored.
That's so good. Yeah, I think it's good to shake it up a little bit and keep things interesting, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Any common misconceptions that you would see that people may have with military medical professionals?
I think there's a lot. I think a common misconception is, well, first of all, anytime they meet me and I say, hi, I'm a neonatologist in the Army, they go, what? What do you mean? Why are there Army people taking care of babies?
Sure.
One of the big things that we do as Army docs is take care of family members. It's a huge part of what military medicine does, and I think that gets forgotten. So the fact that there's this whole world of military medicine that is focused not on the warfighter, but on the family member, huge, huge piece of that. I think another big misconception is they think that the Army is one thing. And it extends beyond just this. But a great example, my mom, before she retired, was a grade school teacher. So I'd go to her 4th grade class and talk to them. And everybody wanted to know, have you shot a gun? Have you ridden in a tank? Something like that. And I am absolutely an Army soldier, and I have done those things, but that's not my day-to-day. My day-to-day is working in a hospital and doing my regular job as a neonatologist. So I would hazard a guess that most of my weeks look pretty close to the program director at Seattle Children's or downtown at University of Texas. So I think it's in thinking that our life is so much different. It is in some ways, but it isn't in a lot of ways too.
Yeah. I do have a few members of my family who are military, and even my dad and my sister and a couple of brother-in-laws. And so I always am sure to tell military members, thank you for your service. But the other people that I always say thank you for your service to are elementary school teachers. So be sure to tell your mom that I said thank you for your service. I know that's not an easy job either, but it really sets people on the right path.
Oh, absolutely. I look back, I'm like, yeah, she had it a lot harder than I do.
Yeah, I always thank my elementary school teachers for sure. So if you could go back in time, is there anything you would change?
other than telling myself to stop worrying about everything, that things are going to work out, that you don't have to stress. Although I see myself falling into the same pitfalls day to day now, you know? So other than that, no, I think that everything that has gotten to this point has landed me here for a reason. I'm where I am for a reason. And I wouldn't change a thing about how I've gotten to where I am today.
That's great. What about for anyone listening who may be considering the military, even maybe someone who's already practicing, a practicing physician who might be joining later in life? Do you have any advice for those folks?
Absolutely. We would love to have you join our team. We're always looking for great people to join the military. And I think it's taking that first step of looking into it, getting the right information and not being scared off by the first thing you hear, and really looking into it, because I will tell you that the military sets you up really well from a number of different angles. First off, I mean, just paying for medical school, if you're looking at it as a medical student, that's kind of huge. And if you go the health professional scholarship route, you're looking at 4 years after you're done with residency or fellowship and you're out with no medical debt from your medical school. I don't really know many other ways that you can do that within the United States. So kind of amazing. But in addition to that's the one that gets sold a lot. The great thing about the military is you're going to have leadership jobs whether you want them or not. When you're a military officer, you are a leader, period. And so when you come out of the military, whenever you do, I guarantee you on your CV, you're going to have a wealth of leadership experience that people on the outside are going to go, oh, we're not just getting a doctor here, we're getting something else. And I know that many of my friends who have gotten out, there is no issue getting a job. They are incredibly marketable. And they also just have this wealth of experience and see things a little bit differently because they've had to step up and be in those leadership roles that they wouldn't have taken otherwise if they had gone a more traditional path.
Gotcha. Anything else? Any other advice for our listeners from either being a physician or any advice for folks just in general? Those folks, this week is match week. So big day tomorrow, folks are going to find out where they're going. And some folks have been scrambling this week trying to find a residency. And, the residents that I've worked with in the past, I always tell them, and I truly believe this in my heart, a lot of times things are out of your control, but everything happens for a reason. You won't know it at the time, but looking back, you'll laugh and you'll say, oh, that's why that happened. It led me to this or it led me to that. So any advice there to any of our listeners?
I echo that. In the moment, sometimes these decisions that come down are really hard. And I think it's not only okay, but it's warranted to let yourself grieve the loss of what you envisioned. So if it was you were going to match one specialty and you didn't, it's okay to be sad and upset about that. But then you also need to look at how are you going to move forward. And like you were mentioning, I think that a lot of my friends who have had that happen to them, it all ended up working out for one reason or another. Whether that was, they really reevaluated and they didn't want to be the orthopedic surgeon that they thought they did. And they ended up becoming a child abuse pediatrician going that route after not matching for 3 years in a row. That was one of my friends. And I think it's just keeping an open mind. The other piece that I tell my trainees now is that no matter what, aim to bloom where you're planted. So life will take you in different ways. And no matter what, and no matter what job you end up in, you're going to take something out of it. And it doesn't feel good to do just a halfway job. So whatever job you end up in, how can you make it better? How can you bloom there? Because that's just going to serve you well no matter where you go.
That's great advice. So let me ask you on that subject, when you move to Washington, how do you keep yourself mentally in place? And you're working all the time, you're doing all this stuff, but you're also moving, you're in a new community, you may not know people. How do you integrate yourself and become a part of that community, even though you're there for a short time?
That's a great question. And we have this happen a lot in the military, obviously. We move around a lot. And I think there's different strategies, and it depends on what type of person you are. So when I started residency, I had just gotten married, but my husband was still geographically separated from me for a while. I was just starting residency, so I was very, very busy. And so my free time was very precious to myself. So I had to figure out what was I going to do with that time. So I joined a couple of local communities, through a church and through a couple of other different recreational things where I met some people outside of just the hospital. That was a big piece of it. But the other thing that I did was I let myself have my days off. And on my days off, I oscillated back and forth between laying on the couch and doing absolutely nothing, which sometimes you need that, and saying, you know what, I have 36 hours off. I'm going to go do all these crazy things in 36 hours because who cares if I'm tired at the end of it? I'm not going to remember that at the end of the day. I'm going to remember this really cool experience that I did. So I think having a nice balance of those was really what helped. Now, fast forward, when we moved here to Texas 4 years ago, I had a son. I was a little bit further in my career. My husband moved with me. Very different place in life. So that was more about forming a community around my son and my role as a mom. And so that looked way different, looking at, moms groups and play dates and getting in with the school. And so I think it really depends on where you are in life and knowing who you are as a person. Are you an introvert, extrovert? What brings you joy? And prioritizing those things.
Yeah. What about mental health? In your profession, I know there are days you go home overwhelmed with sadness, right? How do you deal with that? What are some great ways to deal with not just sadness, but just stress? And what have you found to really help with that outside of work? I mean, I know everybody's different and everybody has hobbies and, things like that. But what are some suggestions from you?
Yeah, so I think there's a few different things that I struggle with that I've found different ways to cope with. So there's the sadness that comes from, I'm a neonatologist. I have a lot of joy in my job, but I also face parents who are losing their children. And that cry of a mother who has lost their baby will stick with you forever. There's a few different things that I do in those moments. One, I lean on my colleagues and trusted friends in the field who I know have been through it and know what that feels like to be there with those parents. I also go back to my why of why I got into this. I got into this because I know that these are precious moments and these are the only moments that some parents have with their babies. And wow, it's really an honor to have walked that with them. And so that brings me some comfort in knowing that. But more the practical side is that I give myself time to grieve. And I had a mentor who used to call them donut days. When she would have an unfortunate outcome, she would call it a donut day. And she'd stop on her way home and get a donut. And that was her way of acknowledging that it's a really sad day and I need some little joy today. So that's that part. The other part that I think a lot of people are facing in medicine, not just the military, that affects their mental health is frustration. So be that you're bumping up against insurance regulations or policies that you think are not right or things that you see as unjust that you can't fix. It is incredibly frustrating. And oftentimes that I have seen affects mental health more than just the human experience and human sadness. That is where I have had to really look at my coping mechanisms. Is it that I need to talk about it? Is it that I need somebody to brainstorm to help me fix it? Ultimately, it's still a work in progress. A lot of it for me is getting it out. So whether that's journaling or talking to somebody, it just needs to get out of my head, not necessarily with a solution, but just out of my head so that I can continue to function and be a good wife, mom, clinician, everything else I need to be, while acknowledging that those frustrations are still there and that are going to continue to be there.
Wow. So what's next for you? Do you have any moves in the future or do you know?
Not at the moment. Nothing planned. We're solvent in the military. We go where we need to go, but I intend to be in the program director job for at least a bit longer. And then we'll see what happens from there. I'll tell you tonight, we're going to have cake because my little guy just turned 1 yesterday. So we're going to do a cake smash.
Oh, nice. Very nice. That's a good way to end the day for sure. Yeah. Well, I want to thank you so much for your service, not only for the military, but also as a physician and what you do. It's amazing. I know that sometimes people don't say thank you enough, but it is appreciated. And on behalf of myself and PracticeLink, we would like to thank Jeanne Krick for being a guest on our podcast. For our listeners, please feel free to reach out with any questions or feedback about anything we covered today by emailing me. If you wish to receive more information about PracticeLink, please visit our website, www.practicelink.com. My name is Charley Lowry, and we appreciate you listening. Thank you again, Dr. Krick, and I hope you have a nice birthday party for your son tonight.
Thanks so much.
Take care.